Culture Talks. My name is Eyal Heldenberg. I'm the CEO of No Barrier, an AI medical interpreter for healthcare providers. Today with me is Matias Saenz. Happy to have you, Matias.
Yes, thank you, Yao. Thank you for hosting me.
Perfect. So, Matias, would love to get to know you a bit, your journey in healthcare, and let's take it from there.
So it all started once I started university, basically, and I always wanted to have like a side job, something I could do, and something that was flexible, especially. And I came across medical interpreting, started certifications, training, taking out licenses, courses, all that. That probably took around like 2 to 3 months, and then I was able to like officially start working, not necessarily certified, but as like a medical interpreter without the state certification. Then after 2 3 months, I got the state certification, so I was officially like certified in Washington State, as well as I had the flexibility to be certified in any other state. So I was basically certified nationwide, and it's been amazing, yeah, because it offers great flexibility, and I can balance my classes, my other like venture and medical interpreting while doing something that's fulfilling and rewarding, and something that keeps me grounded, contributing to my community, contributing to immigrants who come here and need a voice and need someone to speak for them. So yeah, it's great. It feels like social work. It feels like I'm helping people out every day constantly. So yeah, it's a great feeling.
Yeah, totally. And need to mention that you function as a Spanish medical interpreter, right?
Yes, Spanish, that's my language of expertise.
And where is your Spanish from?
Ecuador, South America. It's a small little country right on the equator. Beautiful country. But yeah, that's where my Spanish and diction and lingo comes from as well.
Yeah. So perfect. So I wonder if you can share a moment in your daily day, in your interpreter career, that made you realize what's the impact of your role?
Yes. So when I realized the true impact of my role was after this specific interpreting session I had with an elderly woman. She was in her 80s probably, and she would use her son to interpret for her when she'd go to these medical appointments. And unfortunately, her son had passed away due to a medical condition, and this was her like second or third visit without him. So she was struggling to understand. She wasn't getting medical interpreters. When I met her in this appointment was the first time she got a medical interpreter since her son passed away. So up until then, she was literally not understanding anything the doctors were saying. So I interpreted for her. She seemed very relaxed, very at ease, because she finally had someone who could like understand and communicate with her and the doctor. So yeah, at the end of that appointment, she told me that I reminded her of her son. And that was obviously beautiful to hear and very, very fulfilling, because I realized that my job isn't just about like translating words. It's also about like making people feel heard and supported. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe kind of your kind of description of what is a daily day routine of a medical interpreter in the hospital, in the clinic. Like, what's his job and the interaction between the different players in the clinic?
Yeah, a daily routine consists of you get to the appointment and you get assigned your patient. They're usually surprised when they see you because they don't expect having a medical interpreter, because either they are new to the country and do not know that there was this level of support in the United States, or because in the past they've simply never had medical interpreters. So it's always like a surprise, like, oh, hey, a medical interpreter, that's great. You obviously see a sigh of relief on their face, and they become like happy and relaxed because now they know they're going to understand everything. Usually after that, we go into like the doctor's, like the room or wherever clinic we're going to. I go with the patient. I guide them there, because part of my job as well is to guide, because the hospitals, they're usually so big. Part of my job is to know where to go and take the patients with me so that they don't get lost. And so, yeah, we go to the clinic, usually get the check-in from the nurse, vitals, weight, any signs of like infection, any colds, any symptoms of flu or COVID, what's your weight, what's your height. Then the nurse goes and the doctor comes in, whatever explanation it is, whatever the visit is about. I interpret absolutely everything. That's something I forgot to mention. Like, I interpret from the moment the patient walks into the hospital, from the moment until the moment the patient walks out of the doctor of the clinic. And yeah, so that's basically it. Just once the doctor says what he has to say and the patient also says what the patient, he or she, has to say, that's about it. I just translate words and emotions. Yeah.
Yeah, so basically you follow the patient throughout different touch points and making sure what she or he could feel comfortable and understood. in every touch point, from receptionist, nurse, triage, billing, or whatsoever.
Yeah, even I've had a few moments, even like the cafeteria where I interpret for patients who want pizza or something to eat and they don't know how to say it. So yeah,
Yeah,
everything.
yeah, yeah. Perfect. So I wonder if you can explain the audience what is exactly, sometimes they say medical translator, sometimes they say medical interpreter, kind of a blend of terms. Maybe you can
Yeah.
kind of explain the differences.
Yeah, so differences in from medical interpreter and medical translator is medical translators, they usually translate like written documents, prescriptions, legal stuff, consent forms. That's what they translate the written stuff. They do this either through like programs, through software, or themselves, and usually on the computer. Then the medical interpreters, they translate the words verbatim, the physical action of being there in person, present with the patient and the doctor, interpreting everything. So that's the main difference. And then for the question about like what's the difference between certified and qualified interpreters, they have training but no national certification. So that was what I had at the beginning. Those first 3 months, I had a qualified interpreter status. After 3 months, I got my like NBCMI is the test I took. It's a written test that's pretty long actually. It took me like an hour and a half, and it goes over. I think it was like 80 questions, and it asks about medical conditions. It asks about legal stuff, certain scenarios, and what you should do. What's the right action to take in certain scenarios. So yeah, it goes through literally like medical stuff all the way to legal. So I had to study for a few weeks for that test. So I took that. Then I became so certified is more official, and it basically means yeah you're officially trained and you've got the highest level certification, and you're the highest quality interpreter there is basically.
And I think if I remember correctly, that certification is something you need to renew every couple of years, something like that.
Yeah, I think for the certification, national certification, you're supposed to renew it every 3 to 4 years, I believe. And you do this renewal through another written test, but it's not as extensive. It's just like to make sure you're still kind of like.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I am under the impression that medical interpreter also is around cultural communication, like cultural context. It's not just word by word. So I wonder if you have any example or time that you felt this is more than words in this encounter that you need to facilitate.
Yeah, no, definitely. There's been a few instances of this type of scenario playing out in which patients, because of cultural context or backgrounds, they misunderstand or their goals don't align with what their doctor's telling them. So yeah, for example, like once I had a patient who was refusing antibiotics because they trusted herbal medicines or remedies over the antibiotics. So the doctor insisted and insisted, but the patient wasn't convinced. And then that's when I realized that there was more of like a cultural misunderstanding because they were both obviously very stubborn. The doctor was saying, yeah, you have to take this. And the patient was also saying, no, I won't. It wasn't leading to any like solution. So that's when I realized, and I stepped in and I told the doctor, yeah, there's a cultural misunderstanding here. Usually where this patient is from, which I'm not going to mention in the name, but like it's a specific like country where they pretty much prefer remedies over studied and tested medicine. So I told the doctor that, and to my surprise, like I thought the doctor knew this, but apparently she was new. She was a new doctor, just like recently out of school, like in doing this for like I think it was her like first 2 weeks. So that's when I explained to her, yeah, this patient they prefer remedies, so this is why she's being so stubborn and she's not understanding you. So that's when the doctor adjusted her approach and explained through that different perspective of saying like from like first principles, like why it's remedies, they don't work because obviously, you know why. So
I think that the cultural misunderstanding is sometimes overlooked because, like you say, it could be very hard to do this conversation, right? Because everyone has their own opinions, and now you need to sometimes find the bridge. And this is where medical interpreter actually could kind of
yes.
reach the cultures because he is the mediator. He would know how to communicate it. Do you have any other cultural misunderstanding? That could be the patient or the provider. If you have any other, and maybe like what do you do? Like how do you handle it?
So yeah, in terms of handling it, I usually when I realize because my job is strictly translating words, but there are certain instances in which I am morally obligated to identify when there are like instances in which like if I don't step in, there's no it'll just like the problem will just keep on cycling over and over. So when those scenarios come out and play, that's when I step in and say, yeah, this is happening and we need to like fix this because we're not getting anywhere. So apart from just strictly translating words, yeah, I do also have that moral obligation to step in, make sure all parties are on the same page, because I have the advantage to understand both cultures and both languages. So I'll use that tool to like improve the situation whenever I can.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I have a question about specifically on the Spanish language. Spanish has many dialects from different countries and, maybe even kind of different cultural. It could be the accent, it could be the word choosing, it could be even the pitch, the rhythm of the language. I wonder, how do you see it, kind of how the Spanish dialects may or may not influence a conversation where there is a medical interpreter in the room?
Yes, yeah. There's actually many cases like that, and that tends to happen at least once a week for me because like Spanish language is so diverse and it's spoken so vastly in like so many different countries, and each single country has their own versions of certain words. So it gets pretty intense sometimes, and a few of those cases were, for example, one time a Mexican patient, because in Mexico they say some regions of it's not even overall Mexico, some regions within Mexico say constipado when they're congested. So a Mexican patient once said, yeah, he was constipado, and obviously the similar translation to English is constipated. So the doctor thought the Mexican patient was saying he's constipated, but in reality, he was just saying he's congested. And another case of this, which was actually a pretty serious one that I was able to catch and pretty much save because it was serious. A patient, she said she was embarazada. Let me clear, embarazada. And that sounds like embarrassed if you kind of like hear it without paying much attention, which the doctor, she was like in the MRI room, like doing her stuff. So she heard embarazada. She thought patient meant embarrassed. And she told the patient, like, no, don't be embarrassed. Like, you just have to like uncover your belly. That's it. Don't be embarrassed. But in reality, the patient was saying she's pregnant because embarazada in Spanish means pregnant. And we were in an MRI room, which is full of like radioactive material and x-rays and all that. And pregnant people simply cannot be in rooms with that. So that would have been more serious if I wasn't able to catch that misunderstanding. So yeah, it's another version of like what you mentioned. And another thing, the question you asked me beforehand, which was if there was another situation in which I noticed a cultural misunderstanding. I just remembered one instance where there was this one time like mother, she was hesitant to give consent for a certain operation, and the doctor thought she was just being fearful and was scared. So the doctor is, again, being persistent with saying, like, don't be scared, don't be fearful. It's not that bad. It won't be that serious. But actually, like, I recognize that in some certain parts of Latin America, there's this cultural norm to have a lot of family involvement when it comes to making these big medical decisions. And not just nucleus family, not just like parents or siblings or daughters or sons. It goes up into aunts, uncles, grandparents, great-grandparents, cousins, everyone. So, that's when the doctor understood this and gave her time to call everyone and come to a decision. So yeah.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. 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 Family involvement. I think maybe sometimes I'm talking like family member that is involved in the interpreting part, like in the room, because I know that this is less encouraged in places because of sometimes bias, not so objective, but yeah. So this is another example maybe to make sure that you have a professional medical interpreter in the room that come objective to the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Because sometimes family members, they also don't ensure 100% accuracy because they're not trained or certified. So sometimes they don't interpret correctly. And apart from biases as well, there's a lot of bias when a family member is interpreting for you. So yeah, it's important to always have a medical interpreter no matter what. Like if it doesn't matter if the patient is with a family member, that's still not, that can still be dangerous. I mean, I've seen cases where family members, they skip certain details on purpose because they don't want the family member to know because of a certain bias they have. I'm not sure what the bias is, but like it's happened and it happens continuously and it's dangerous and it's not fair for the patient. So yeah.
Yeah. Healthcare sometimes is around hard conversation, sad conversation. I wonder if you had any chance that you were participating in I don't know, delivering bad news or something like that.
Yeah, it's part of the job. We do have to deliver pretty bad news, like end of life discussions. Those
Yeah.
can get pretty heavy and pretty sad, but it's part of the job. An example of this was like one time I had a young girl. She was old enough to give consent on whether or not she wanted to end her cancer treatment. I think it had been like 2 years already. Unfortunately, yeah, she did not want to continue treatment. She was old enough to make this decision, and I had to interpret for the doctors how, like, the conversation she had with her parents, to the reasoning as why she wanted to end treatment. And yeah, that was obviously pretty heavy. All the doctors, they came into the room. A lot of staff came into the room, visited her. We said our goodbyes, including me. And yeah, it was heavy. Like, we were all crying, and yeah. But it's. At least I knew I was there to facilitate communication, and I knew, like, I helped the parents out with what they were trying to convey and say to the doctors. So yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it could get very hard. I wonder if there is any mental difficulties that a medical interpreter could take home, for example, around those situations. Is there any impact?
Yeah, there certainly is. It does happen when, like, I get home sometimes and remember what this a very heavy, very sad appointment I had, and it sticks with me for a while. I mean, it lingers for a while and it's there. But then usually a day or two later, I have to move on because, like, this is like a job. It's strictly work, and there's so many cases of interpreting bad scenarios and bad outcomes that if I let these stuff get to me, I'll just constantly be sad and depressed. So that's not something that anyone wants. So yeah, I have to separate the work from my personal life and not let it affect me too much in my personal life. When I'm at work, I'm all stakes. I'm all for the worst case or the best case. Like, it's my job. I'll be there and I'll interpret everything no matter what, obviously. But once I get, like, home and once I leave work, I mean, I tend to divide it more and separate a bit more.
Yeah. I guess this is natural to make sure that the medical interpreter is safe and can continue to operate and
Yeah.
live the life.
Yeah, it's not for everyone too, because I guess, like, doctors and nurses are people who can relate to this because they're also there. But as you know, like, there's doctors and nurses who they prefer not to work in that medical, like, industry because it is filled with bad news and bad scenarios. So if you're someone who's if you're someone who's greatly affected by negative stuff, then interpreting, doctor, or being a nurse is not the move for you. Or social work. I mean, there's many different roles, but yeah, it's not meant for everyone. And there's certain interpreters who they try to, like, they start interpreting, and a few months later they quit because it's just too much for them.
Yeah. Totally understood. You mentioned that you now work in a children's hospital. Is there any difference between interpret to children or to adults?
Yeah, there is certainly a difference. For children's, I think it tends to be less serious sometimes because obviously they're children. So they come in sometimes playing around or, like, laughing, and so they lighten the mood a little bit. And in terms of, like, translate interpretation, yeah, you have to even interpret what the child says. So if it's a 6-year-old child who only speaks Spanish, even if he says the most ridiculous thing, which children tend to do,
Yeah.
you have to interpret it. So, like, even if he mentions if he says something embarrassing about the mother or embarrassing about the doctor,
Yeah.
and tells the doctor, like, you have a weird nose or something like that, I have to interpret it. So yeah, it lightens the mood for sure. Obviously, also when it comes to, like, heavy and sad news, like, heavier for children because they're children. That it becomes, I wouldn't say, like, worse, but yeah, it does. It is a bit more difficult to interpret bad news to children instead of, like, just normal adults. Both are sad and all, but yeah, for children it's even worse, honestly.
Yeah, totally. I wonder if you find yourself sometimes kind of simplify the language of providers, because sometimes providers tend to use very professional terms, terminology. I wonder if you find yourself kind of try to kind of get it to a more explainable version of it.
Yeah, so I have to interpret everything the doctor says, even if it's the most complex thing that I know the patient won't understand. I still have to say it. But the thing is, doctors, they know this, so they simplify it for you. So
Mm.
they off the bat they simplify as much as possible so that the interpreter can relay that simplified version to the patient. I've rarely had cases where doctors have full on used medical, like extremely like accurate medical terminology to explain some type of condition to a patient, because obviously there's thousands of words that the patient won't know. But yeah, it's happened but very few times. And when it happens, the reaction from the patient lets the doctor everything he needs to know, because the patient will just have a confused glaze on their face. They'll just be like, what did you just say? And then that's when the doctor corrects and says something that makes more sense or something more simple and digestible.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you said that like probably most of the providers read the room, understand who's here, and kind of naturally simplify the language. Yeah, yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have another questions about when you think about where we are right now and future and how we're gonna evolve these interpretation services. What do you see as the biggest opportunity for improving those cross cultural communication?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity to improve cross-cultural communication. There's opportunities in technological advancements and innovation, such as AI. There's certainly many different opportunities, especially when it comes to improving the interpretation of like regional dialects or very medical, like very advanced, sophisticated medical terminology. I think that's where AI can do a very good job, because not everyone, for example, like I'm from Ecuador, so we have a different version of Spanish. And when I'm interpreting for someone who is from Guatemala, I try my best to switch to their region of like dialect, but obviously I don't know the difference. Like I'm not, there's a lot of variations, there's a lot of difference. So I can't, it's like learning like half a new language almost. Or no, it's not that bad actually. But there are words, like many different words that I don't know that people in Guatemala use. So that's where AI can come in play. That's because AI or technology, they exactly knows. If so, a person from Guatemala, it'll know exactly what words to use. Also for medical terminology or like complete accurate translation, we're human. We're human, and sometimes we have our faults and we forget a detail or a word or two. We can omit very important details, and that's dangerous. That's risky for the patient. AI or technology will never forget and will never skip a word. So that's also something I do take into consideration. So yeah, that's where I see this technology very much improving cross-cultural healthcare. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, technology could yeah make more bridges and make them kind of more accessible. I agree on that.
Yeah.
I wonder. I have a question about kind of the the rewarding part of being a kind of a Spanish speaking interpreter. What's the reward part of the job during those?
Yeah, I think the very rewarding part is learning about different cultures and gaining more diverse perspectives about different communities and different cultures. Like before this job, I had no idea there were so many variations of Hispanic people. And learning about their food and culture and festivities is very fun, because you learn. And personally, like obviously I like learning. You gain deeper perspectives, and also like I tend to connect with these patients, and sometimes like I even become friends with them. And when I see them around at the hospital, I sit down and like have a conversation with them.
Nice.
And this obviously leads to like more understanding of like where they're from. And I learned many new things. Like I think last week I learned that a certain plate of food was actually from, I think it was Honduras, and beforehand I thought it was like from Mexico, but actually it was Honduras. Obviously, like the person who told me this was Honduras, so it might have been biased, like because there's always like these like there's always these debates on like where food is from, but still, like I had no idea this debate even existed in the first place. So it was interesting learning about just stuff like this, you know, just like learning more. That's rewarding.
Yeah. All right. Maybe last question for providers that listen to this episode. As a medical interpreter, could you give a couple of tips for providers on those sessions that involve medical interpretation? Matthias, maybe last question for this episode for the providers that listen to this episode. Could you give us some tips for working with medical interpretation, with medical interpreter in the room, how to kind of make this experience better?
Yeah. I think obviously the provider's role is extremely important, and like we really respect providers and doctors and nurses when they come in. We know like they've been through years of studying, they've been through years of classes and exams and tests, and they're extremely knowledgeable and smart people. Like we know this, and we sometimes admire them and really respect them and want to be like them eventually too. So yeah, there's that kind of dynamic. And also, like, so for one thing, like, one piece of advice would maybe be more patience. I feel like sometimes I encounter providers who want to hurry up the process, and I get cut off a lot as an interpreter. Like, I'm saying something and get cut off, and I understand that's not with ill intent. That's not because like they're just like underplaying what I say, or they don't like respect what we do. Obviously, it's not the case, but it is important to be mindful that we have to interpret everything, and if we feel hurried or like pressured, then sometimes we naturally, certain interpreters, they might cut what they say and they might skip a detail or two. It's obviously not good. So apart from like just patience, and then just like apart from that, everything's good. Like there's good teamwork and good clarity, and the dynamic is cool. Like in doctors, I feel like they are appreciative for the role we do, like for what we do. They know our role is important and it's crucial in the healthcare setting. They know this. And so, yeah, there's respect, mutual respect on both sides. But yeah, I understand doctors, they can be in a hurry. A lot of times they're pretty much like all day working nonstop. But sometimes like, yeah, just like I get cut off a lot. So that's just the one thing I'd say, like, I don't know, maybe more patience or yeah, that's it.
Yeah, totally understood. Perfect. So, Matthias, it was great having you in Care Culture Talks. I learned a lot and appreciate it.
Thank you, Ayel, for having me. It's great speaking about my experience. I've always wanted to speak about interpretation, and now I had a chance. So yeah, thank you.